Greetings and salutations. Hey everyone, I don't know why I did that. So, welcome to another episode. This is our first guest episode. You guys, I am so excited and I honestly could not have asked for a better conversation for our first guest episode. So, in today's episode, we're going to get into the neuroscience and psychology behind feelings and emotions and interpreting the world. So, we're going to talk about first whether it's a myth that women are more emotional than men. We're also going to talk about whether women have any sort of psychological superpowers. And we'll also discuss why it might be a good idea to gaslight yourself and be delusional, and how that will actually help shape the way that you see and interact with the world. All right, with that, I'm going to request that the DJ play the theme song so we can get into the episode. Welcome everyone to the baddest bitch in the building. I am Nikki, your host. I am the baddest bitch in the building, not to be confused with you, who is also the baddest bitch in the building, and not to be confused with Laura, who is with us today. We're here with Laura Beavin-Yates. She earned her PhD in cognitive psychology at Claremont Graduate University, and she's the chief marketing officer at Six, which is the world's first emotional fitness app that uses 20 years of neuroscience and links to your wearable device like your Apple Watch to pick up automatic signals that your brain sends throughout the day and measures how your body responds to different experiences. So, Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Nikki. It's such a pleasure to join you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Do you want to give everybody just a quick intro and a background on who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Sure, yeah. So, as you mentioned, thank you so much for that great intro. I'm currently leading marketing and growth for Six. It's been a bit of a nonlinear journey for me. So, much like many women who I've spoken to who are doing super awesome things in the world today. So, that's my first message to anyone. Nonlinear is okay. So, I got my PhD in cognitive psychology from Claremont Graduate University. My full intent was to go into academia, and at the 11th hour, realized maybe academia is not for me. I ended up actually starting my career in neuromarketing. So I did take some of the neuroscience background and worked for a couple of years applying the neuroscience knowledge that I had to helping people understand how to use those tools in order to understand and evaluate marketing content and material. Also spent some time in a more traditional market research role, and then got a call from my grad school advisor saying, hey, the work that you were working on in graduate school, we have launched a company that takes all of this, what was manual research, and we've automated the ability to detect whether or not people are emotionally connecting with experiences. And so I joined Immersion in 2017, and Immersion is our parent company of Six. And now am, like I mentioned, leading growth and marketing for our new brand, Six.
That's amazing. I mean, speaking of non-linear journeys, I mean, that resonates with me because I
Yeah.
did not come from the podcasting or content creation world at all.
Right.
Like, I came from the corporate world. Yeah, so I totally get that. Laura, this is as soon as I knew we were going to talk and that you have a background in psychology and neuroscience, I'm like, I need to debunk a myth or confirm it. I don't know. So, the concept that women are more emotional than men and men are more logical than women, is that a myth?
Well, I'm a scientist, so I will unpack this a little bit. I would say there may be some accuracies to saying that there are differences, obviously, in men and women. However, I think it's really important to note that there's a lot of research. So, again, being an academic, I care about what data tells me. I care about research that shows evidence that there are differences. I think actually, preparing for this conversation, I wanted to go out and kind of do some research to see what do the stats say, because the thing that's crazy about psychology, I used to teach intro psychology, and I would tell my students this, what we discover over time, it changes. So there are studies and results that were published, back in the 60s and 70s that have been completely debunked. And it's very likely that there were early studies, and even there are some studies today that show differences in the way in which females and males potentially emotionally react or their emotional perceptions. However, just like those studies that show that there are differences, there are tons of studies that show that there actually aren't that many differences. So the reality is, we've got a lot of data that is starting to suggest that even if there are small differences, they are probably not super duper significant. And the differences that do exist are probably coming partly from the way in which we're socialized. Obviously, men and women, little boys, little girls are treated differently when they are children. They are given different kinds of toys. They are held up to different expectations, which is really unfortunate. Boys are told that they should be strong and that they shouldn't react if they fall down, and shouldn't cry or shouldn't have emotions if they're having a challenge with someone at school. And that's really unfortunate because we're all human. At the end of the day, we all have emotions. We all have experiences that impact us and how we interact with the world. Similarly, in emotional intelligence, for example, emotional intelligence is made up of several different factors. And when you look at the research is showing recently that there aren't as many differences as we thought once. And if there are differences, it might be in particular elements. So women tend to score slightly higher on empathy and social engagement or social connection, while men tend to show slightly higher confidence. And again, these aren't, to me, at least in my opinion, I haven't studied this, hugely. So being a researcher, but in my view, these are not things necessarily that are innately programmed in our brain. Not something that we're necessarily born with these differences in our capacity to recognize emotions from someone else, but we are socialized to be different in the way that we react and handle others. And I will tell you one thing, if you don't, just quickly, that is that there does tend to be a big differences. I'm sorry, a big difference in, and that is in females being more likely to take on the emotional responsibility of others. And again, this is not something I believe this is not something that is innate in us. I believe it's something that we're socialized to do. I heard a great webinar one time where a woman was talking about the fact that we as women tend to take on the responsibility and feel as though we're responsible for other people's emotions, our partners, the people we work with, but also that we tend to say yes to things that add to our emotional burden. So that was kind of a long answer to say, the more recent data is suggesting actually no, there are not as many differences as was once thought. And my hypothesis is when differences exist, it's probably more in the way we're socialized as opposed to in the way that we are biologically programmed, say.
So would you say that the role of men and women is more complementary, that like women can sort of fill in the gaps that men have and vice versa?
I would say that yes, absolutely, there's complementariness in the way and opportunities for both women and men to fill gaps that exist. But I don't think it's appropriate to say that, again, it's women's responsibility to do X and men's responsibility to do X. I think we actually need to change and flip the script so that men can be emotional. Because guess what? Plenty of studies show that good leaders are leaders who are empathic. Good leaders are people who actually care about others, who think about others, and they take perspective and put themselves in others' shoes. And assertiveness can go so far, but you need that empathic element and the care. And so it's just as important for men to be able to show those things as it is for women to also exercise their assertiveness in certain cases where maybe their voice isn't being heard, because we live in a world, unfortunately, where we haven't been teed up to have. I mean, you know this more than I. You talk about this all the time, right? That's the point of so.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's basically what I'm talking. Like the whole purpose of this podcast is sort
Great.
of deprogramming ourselves from those sort of gender specific um expectations and responsibilities that have been placed upon us. Like all the people who I know who are people pleasers are women.
Well, and Nikki, that goes back to the whole idea of like this, it's because of that emotional responsibility and this like emotional load that we take on, where it's like, and me too. I mean, I am that person. I'm so that person. And I constantly have to stop and say, okay, wait, like, am I doing this because it's something that I feel,
No, totally. I have another question sort of hinging on this,
yeah.
which is there like a feminine superpower that you've discovered that women have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm always hesitant, I think, to say that because, like we were just talking about, there's a lot of socialization aspects. But I do think our tendency, I think women do tend to default. And again, this may be kind of contradictory to what I was saying earlier, but socialization or not, I think many women tend to default to this connection element. And I wouldn't say this is not like, I wouldn't say that this is a superpower that only women have. I think men can do this too. I just don't think they tend to as much. But I think that women tend to be more super connectors. I know that women tend to maintain relationships for longer. And again, I don't think that's because men don't have the capacity to, but I think it's because we have been socialized to create those relationships. And I think that that is a superpower. I think that we know actually from research that's been done on happiness that one of the top contributors to happiness is your social network. So women tend to tend to have larger social networks. They tend to, again, maintain those friendships. This is absolutely true for me versus my husband. My husband has certainly got friends, but his network of people, I mean, I'm in touch with my best friend since I was 5 years old. I maintain that relationship. I've got a lot of those friendships that have lasted through life. And I think that ability to go in and to connect and to listen and to be authentic, which again, I wouldn't say is something men can't do, but women tend to, I think, do that more, is a superpower. Because when you build authentic relationships with people, it helps you in so many ways, not just because socialization or socializing more leads to happiness, but also we know that networking is one of the best things you can do for career growth. So I think that really is a superpower that allows not only for us to be fulfilled more and for us to have better happiness and longer, happier lives, but it also is a superpower when it comes to our career because those relationships matter so much. And I think women are really good at building those and really kind of leaning in and giving back in relationships like that.
You actually sent me this really good podcast episode about emotions and feelings,
Yeah.
and it got me thinking about a lot of things. And one of the things that they mentioned on this, and you can like correct me if I'm, misinterpreting it, but one of the things they mentioned is that our feelings are not actually objective interpreters of the world. They're predictions about how we should feel about a certain situation. So our brain takes in sensory signals from, what we're seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, whatever, and interpreting that, and also using our past experiences to make sense of like what it is. Like, for example, if someone is yelling at me, it's using like all those cues plus past experiences of people yelling at me to put two and two together and say like this person is angry and I should feel scared, for example.
Right.
So if you agree with that like sort of statement, or that finding that feelings are predictions of the world and it's not,
Mhm.
they're not reactions of it, how do you think that we can, or this gives us an opportunity to sort of reshape how we see the world in terms of our own position within it, especially as women?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nikki. And I think, you did a great job of describing that. So I mentioned I used to teach, and when I was teaching about 10 years ago, which seems insane, I remember talking about theories of emotion and sharing those with my class, with my students. And I remember telling them, we really don't understand, we don't have a good understanding of how our brain and body experiences emotions. Back in the day, they used to think that every single emotion had a distinct physiologic activation in our body. And that's just not true. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, who was the one who was the guest of the podcast that you mentioned, she has done incredible things in order to help us understand how emotions work. And to your point, Nikki, I mean, very much our brains are lazy organs. I mean, our brain weighs 3% of our body's weight, yet the brain requires 30% of our body's resources. That is insane. Our brain is like a budget allocator. So when you think about the brain and the way it processes experiences, it's really, like you said, it's a 0-1 input, and it's just getting all this information from our senses and then looking to what's around us, our context, and as you mentioned, past memories, in order to try to understand how to interpret the world. I like to, if I liken this to the dress. Do you remember the blue and gold, or
Yes.
the what is it, like blue and black or white and gold dress, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and it's crazy if you think about something like that. That's one single picture that people saw vastly differently. We think that our brains are, that my brain is a carbon copy of your brain and that they operate exactly the same and that our perceptions of the world are all similar. And that's not true. It's just not true. And so I think part of, to come back to your question, which is how do we, kind of garner this? I think the first step is understanding that the way we feel is a guess. The way we feel and the emotions that we're experiencing at a moment are something that our brain is doing its best job of trying to tell us how we should act based on what it knows about what it's getting input wise and what's happening around us. And the minute that we recognize that our what we think we're aware of, our feelings, not necessarily think, but what we're aware of is not the full picture, it gives us an opportunity to understand how we can, and to kind of self-reflect on ways in which we can change our emotional reactions, ways in which we can garner those, ways in which we can take control over and build emotional resilience so that when we have the conversation with Tom, who is super aggressive because he's a male and he's been taught to overtalk and interrupt women, we actually have an ability to be emotionally resilient and to speak up and to stop Tom from interrupting us and to take the steps that are necessary to start leveling the playing field, right? So I think it's that understanding that the way I'm feeling right now, number one, is changeable, is something that I can adjust over time, and that there's more to just what I think I feel. And that's really one of the things we're trying to do through six, which is surface these moments that actually matter, not just what we think matters, so that you can really start to kind of take control. Because again, I think we as humans, because we're sentient beings, we assume that the way we're feeling is the end all be all. But the reality is it's just a best guess, right? And we have opportunity to kind of take control over that.
We can basically gaslight ourselves into, telling ourselves that we should feel one way rather than another. And I'm just trying to think of an example. But even for me, I honestly think I'm like one of the most delusional people I know, just because I
Sure.
just go around in the world and I used to be really angry at the
Hmm.
world. I used
Hmm.
to be frustrated. I used to be angry. I'm like, this is a man's world. There's no place for me within it. And then I just saw everything as a way to like confirm my subservience
Yeah.
as a woman.
Right.
But it, and the world hasn't changed since I changed my thinking. It's only been a few years, but
Yeah.
I changed the way I interpreted everything and the way I carried myself in the world. And then that shaped my experience. So
Yes.
I don't know. It's like a circular thing, but I really literally just gaslit myself into thinking like this is a woman's world and I am the center of the universe and
I love
everything's going
it.
to go my way.
It's
Right?
all, I mean, the thing that people don't understand, that always, I mean, I'm not trained in therapy, but I understand the importance of therapy because our brain has something called plasticity. And what that means is that our brain can adapt and form new network connections over time. And Nikki, exactly how you just described, your default way of thinking was, this is a man's world. I can never get ahead. That was your default way of thinking. What happens when the brain activates and when we have network connections within the brain is that there is a default activation. The same thing happens for people who have depression. I've been fighting, like fighting an illness. And basically, like this weekend, I was definitely feeling low. Like I felt icky. I was feeling sad for myself. And I realized I had to snap myself out of it because I realized I choose my attitude and my perceptions about the world. And so the same way for people who have depression, they have a default network that leads them to think negatively as opposed to thinking positively, but that can be changed over time. Just like you changed your perceptions. Now, it doesn't happen overnight always, because I'm sure that there are moments when you made this decision to shift your perception. I'm sure there were moments where you had this creeping thing, and we all have, like, women tend to have imposter syndrome. I mean, my mom is a very integral person in my life who I think helped me in me reflecting before coming on this podcast. I was thinking about, like, I've always had the attitude that women are just as good as men. Not because my dad told me when I was a kid, he's like, men are pigs. Like he would always say that. And he's a great guy, but he would say, even myself, I'm lucky that I was raised with parents who, and my mom was a shining example of somebody who like, she didn't give a shit. She was there. Sorry, I don't know if I could say that. She was right there next to men. Like she got her pilot's license when she was like 17. She had her first kid at 16 and still got her pilot's license, became a businesswoman. She didn't leave the opportunity to not succeed, but it's a mindset, right? And that's what I think is so important for listeners, for anyone to understand. It's, you don't have to be the victim. You don't have to be, like you choose your perspective, and it's not always easy to change, but if you're committed to it, you can do it. And then that can completely change your life and the way that you can achieve things, because now you feel like you have this perception that you're like, F everything. We're on level playing ground, and hell, I'm actually above you and I'm going to win no matter what. That matters a lot. You're going to get a lot further than somebody who's like, oh, and it's all about locus of control too. You adopted an internal locus of control. I'm going to take control. I'm going to do this versus the world is out to get me, And so those things are really important, and they can completely change. It's not just like your perception changing. You literally change the way your brain is wired by like working on those things over time.
Okay, that's fascinating because I knew I'm changing my perception. I didn't really know if I'm changing like my brain wiring and things like that. And
Yeah.
so, like a lot of people who see my content and say, for example, like, this is really privileged. Like, you can't take control of the patriarchy. You can't take advantage of the patriarchy. That's such a privileged thing to do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it is. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't want to have a victim mindset about
Right.
anything. Right. So I feel like everybody has privileges in life. Just the fact that we're sitting here talking today is a privilege, because a lot of
Absolutely.
people don't have the health or the technology or the means to do that. So this is privilege.
Right.
But I feel like as soon as I start blaming things on external systems that I can't really control,
Yeah.
that's when I fall into a victim mindset. That's where I was a few years ago when I was so angry at the world, because I'm like, this is the world. It's not going to change. Nothing is going to change. This is the way it is until the end of time.
Yeah.
But flipping the script, and that's why I say maybe I'm delusional. Like, I don't know, but
No.
it's
And
worked for me.
yeah, and that's again in psychology, that locus of control. There's been tons of research that show that people who adopt an internal locus of control, I am control over my own success, what happens in the world. I'm not the victim. The world is not happening to me. I'm happening and choosing my experiences. There's tons of research that shows that people who adopt this internal locus of control succeed. They do better. They like achieve more in life, they're happier in life. And so it's super important that you made that switch, because again, when we feel like things are out of our control, then we lose our motivation. And the same is true, Nikki, of if you're in school and studying, or you're at a job doing something, or you're starting, a podcast, and, or you're taking on the patriarchy. I mean, those are all things that are super important when it comes to thinking about, I have control over doing this. I have the power, the strength, and I may not have the support immediately, but I'll find it. Like, those are all things that enable us to continue to fight that fight. But the minute, to your point, that we say, that you take this, and it happens. There are certainly times in life where like again, yesterday, I was like, man, I'm so tired of being sick. Everything's horrible. And, that is not me. I'm an optimist through and through, but you're going to have some circumstances in life where you feel down and out. But the key is remembering and recognizing this is a moment in time, and this will go away. I will feel better tomorrow, because that's also another important thing. Our experiencing self and our remembering self are very different. We tend to look through things with rose-colored glasses when it comes to our remembering self, and we kind of look back and think on things. We see them as much less negative than they actually were potentially. So that's another important thing. Things will be hard, but guess what? If you take the right mindset, you'll look back and they won't seem nearly as hard as they were.
And if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. I've been thinking a lot about the concepts of manifestation and like the law of attraction, of sort of having like positive energy begets positive energy, negative energy attracts negative energy.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like some neuroscience behind that? I know you talked about how our brain wiring could sort of change with,
Mm-hmm.
Changing our mindset. Is there any like psychological root or explanation for things like manifestation and law of attraction?
I would say, there's certainly research again that shows that taking a positive mental attitude and that internal locus of control is beneficial, and it changes the way that our brain is wired, right? Because again, if you just think about those kind of default networks, and it's really like the path of least resistance, where you've got the strongest connections in your brain is where your thoughts tend to go. So I would say that, I don't know that there's research necessarily that shows that, people who I would hypothesize there probably is, but that people who think more positive have more positive things happen to them. I just simply haven't researched that, so I'm not sure. But I will say that having a positive mindset and taking responsibility for and control over your own perceptions can absolutely change your default thinking over time. And we've talked a bit about that. There is also something, Nikki, called neural, now that word's going to escape me, but it's like neural coupling, or basically this reciprocity effect. And so it is interesting because we've actually shown through our research at Immersion that this idea, and not only through us, there's plenty of other research out there that supports this as well. This idea of neural coupling is, if my brain is all into a conversation, then it's likely that the person I'm having a conversation with is also all in. So there can be this kind of effect of like my physiology impacting someone else. And so I would say, without having done the research myself, I would hypothesize that you might see, some cases where, again, because you go out in the world with a positive and optimistic view, that has an impact on others, and then those lead to positive things. So I think looping back to your kind of question about this optimism and, the law of attraction, I do think we want, as humans, to be around people who are more positive. We want to be around people who are smiling, people who are happy. Unfortunately, people who suffer from depression and anxiety disorders sometimes are the ones that suffer the most, because not only are they experiencing this kind of negative cycle, but also they're not as enjoyable to be around. And so it creates a challenge for the network that they so much need to come and support them, So apologies, that was kind of a long answer to say, I do believe, I don't have the data to back it up, and being a scientist, I'll always caveat that, but I do very much believe that, at least in my own life, I've seen the evidence of that. And it feels as though, based on what I know about, our tendency to want to be around more positive things as humans, that yes, I would expect there's probably data showing that there's a relationship there.
And speaking of ways of making our lives better, I want to talk about the Six app, because you've mentioned it a few times. So I feel like this is a good moment to sort of shift the conversation to that.
Sure.
Can you give us like a quick overview of what the Six app is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we released the Six app about a year ago, and the Six app is designed to help individuals measure and maintain their emotional fitness. Now, what is emotional fitness? Emotional fitness is basically similar to physical fitness, but it's basically our brain finding these moments where basically it's thriving. So to give a little context to how we got here, when I was in graduate school, we actually were studying oxytocin because we wanted to understand, is there something that we can measure in the body and brain that allows us to predict whether or not someone is likely to do something later. So we spent a good 20 years of neuroscience research, 20 years conducting neuroscience research, to really map out what we would describe as the brain's socio-emotional valuation network. Now, I'll unpack that a little. What that means basically is the network in the brain that gets activated when we have an experience that is socially or emotionally valuable to us. We have an experience where our brain thinks, this is something that's meaningful and valuable enough that I'm going to release these neurochemicals that mark it as meaningful and significant. And the two key neurochemicals that it turns out matter for this are oxytocin and dopamine. Oxytocin, you might have heard of it before, but it's really known, and in fact, it's called the love hormone. It is a neurochemical, I'll specify. So it operates in the brain, but also it circulates in the body. But it turns out oxytocin plays a huge role in things beyond just what used to be thought as its role only as mother-infant bonding. Turns out it's really important for bonding with a significant other. Also, if you meet someone new, it helps you to trust that individual. So we discovered that this neurochemical was super important when it comes to having an experience and marking that as meaningful and significant, and then also driving action later. So in 2017, we launched our company Immersion, which was designed to help people measure experiences and to create better experiences. Fast forward to 2020, we had some research where we found that the same network in the brain that's responsible for exceptional experiences and marking those as significant and meaningful also gets activated when we have experiences that help us thrive. So we actually found that our continuous measures allowed us to predict mood and energy up to 2 days in advance. And at that point, even though we were really a B2B business, we realized this is an ability that we would be completely letting down humans if we didn't create an app that allowed people to use this tool in order to maintain their own well-being. So the way it works, as you mentioned, Nikki, is that basically it pairs our algorithms that we developed from 20 years of neuroscience, and they pair with everyday wearables. So Apple Watch, Whoop, or Ring, Fitbit, the list goes on and on. We support about 85% of the devices on the market. And the way it works is it's a passive app that works in the background. So for example, I'm measuring my six right now. It passively measures my physiology throughout the day, and it looks for these moments, which we describe in the app as key moments. And these key moments are moments when we know, based on your physiologic patterns, that your brain and body are releasing dopamine and oxytocin. We know from our research that you need 6 of these key moments daily to report thriving, flourishing, better mood, and better energy. So we're helping people to uncover those key moments. And then within the app, you can label them so that then over time, the app learns what are the things personally that are helping you thrive. And it also highlights the low moments as well. So you can pair it with your calendar. If you see that every time you have a meeting with Tom, it's a really low score, we measure 2 things: neurologic value, that's that connection, but also psychological safety. If you see that you're meeting with Tom every week, you have really low safety, then you may want to approach that meeting differently so that you can make it a more effective meeting for both you and for Tom and the outcome in essence. So that's the kind of broad swath of it. The goal, again, passive tool that allows you to understand those moments that you may not be consciously aware of that are helping you to thrive.
I used the app and tried to like find my key moments, and it was interesting because it was a little bit of things I guessed would be
Yeah.
key moments and also things that I was surprised didn't show up as key moments. So,
Yeah.
for example, like, having dinner with my cousins, that came up as a key moment. Makes sense. That's a social experience with people I enjoy being around.
Yeah.
Working on an episode and like sitting down and writing an episode was a key moment.
Yeah.
Obviously, also made sense.
Yeah.
And then, for example, I was practicing piano because my piano teacher has given me like 6 new pieces to prepare,
Uh-huh.
and that didn't show up as a key moment for me. And
Interesting.
I was surprised, but also I'm at a point where like the pieces are new. So it's all of me like fumbling and trying to like get into the groove of it. And usually when I have a piece that's mostly done, I'm able to like play through it and it's nice and it's almost ready and I get like enjoyment out of that. But this was like beginning. I'm like, I hate doing this right now.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
It's so funny that you say that, Nikki. One of the things that's really interesting about the 2 measures that we're measuring. So again, value is like, is your brain loving it? That's an easy way to describe it. We also joke that it's a gas measure. It's a give a shit measure. Like, does your brain
Mhm.
care about this? But value, or I'm sorry, psychological safety on the flip side is really your comfort and confidence in an experience. So I would be curious to know, based on your measurement for the time playing the piano, or those new pieces, how your psychological safety was. And the reason I say that is because one really interesting aspect, typically, when you think of psychological safety, you think of it in, a work context, right? Do I feel comfortable and confident with my team, sharing my ideas, challenging things? But there's a really interesting kind of self-reflection element here, because when you have low psychological safety and high value, that's a learning opportunity. So I would be curious to see, as you play more over time, whether that gap shrinks, I guess, and whether you start to get key moments from that. Because I actually, we overhauled our website last year, and we have it programmed through HubSpot. I am not familiar. I mean, I use HubSpot, but I never set up the website or anything through it. And website design is not my favorite thing ever. So I realized as I was doing the website that my value was super duper high, but my safety was low, but it grew over time and the gap closed. So it was just a really interesting kind of self reflection aspect.
I was actually wondering, are there common key moments for women, or certain things maybe we should be seeking out more throughout our days?
That's a good question, Nikki. We've not gathered enough data to know, if there are differences for males versus females and kind of what drives those key moments. Um, I've certainly heard some consistencies in general about certain things that drive key moments. So, for example, like you mentioned, socializing, and it's not all socializing. Having a conversation with your aunt may not have the same impact as, being out to dinner, like with your group of cousins or something like that. But what's interesting is I've heard fairly consistently that cooking brings people key moments, and that's certainly true for me. So I find that really interesting. I don't know that there's necessarily something that might be specific to females, but I would think about, you know, just because you're not getting a key moment from something. The other thing is key moments can change over time. Again, our brain is lazy and our brain likes novelty. So what might bring you key moments, this week may not be the exact same thing next week because our brain wants to adapt and kind of grow over time. But I would think of things that when you think about kind of joyous moments generally, try some of those. But I think the beauty of six is that it helps to uncover the things that you may not have thought of. And like, for example, I love music. I've always loved music, but as I've gotten older and gone through my career, I don't always play it when I'm working, and I just don't always put it on. I started to play music in the morning when I was getting ready, and I realized that every time I do it, I get a key moment. And it makes me feel so like allows me to go into the day differently, right? Because I feel like I'm taking control over my success for the day. I'm setting myself up to be in a better position. I don't know. So anyway, it's interesting.
It sounds like a life hack almost, because you like download this app, you use it, it's like in the background, you can kind of forget about it, right?
The reason we wanted to create this passive experience is because we're all being told all the time that we should be doing like adding, you should do yoga, you should meditate, you should go work out, it's all so much. And the reality is the same things don't work for everyone. So we want to be a tool that allows people to personally discover what helps them to thrive. And to your point, Nikki, I mean, our goal is to make it as passive as possible, even to the point of, again, you can connect to calendars. So you don't necessarily have to go in and label everything. We can help surface, your regular meetings and things. And we give tips. I mean, you can actually look in the app to see what your forecast looks like for tomorrow and the day after. So the goal, of course, is that you can curate your day. So if you're projected to have a day that's, average or lower than average, then you can actually take control over and be conscientious about how you plan your day. Because not everyone, Nikki, gets, I love that you said you got a key moment when you were like working on editing or planning for, because there are a lot of things I do throughout my day that don't give me key moments. So I try to stack those in the morning when I'm more likely to get key moments or when I have higher energy, So you can really kind of hack your calendar and again, you have a challenging meeting with Tom every week, go out for a walk ahead of time because that's going to help you reset.
It reminds me of apps you can use to track your period, and it sort of helps you track those things that you forget about until they actually happen.
Yeah, I've talked with my colleague actually a bit about how we would love at a point to be able to see an integration with an app like that, right? Because
Mm.
I mean, imagine, being women, we all know that like if we're not using those to a T, you have that day where you're like, why am I so grumpy? Why am I like, I'm frustrated today and I have a shorter fuse than normal. And then you go to your app and you're like, well, shit, okay. Now I understand why. Because guess what? Our hormones are fluctuating. I am 42, I think 41. I forget at this point, but I'm getting to the point where I'm going to be facing perimenopause. And guess what? To be able to know that, like, based on the way that my hormones are circulating, which unfortunately is less predictive now, but to know how those things couple, obviously, with your emotional well-being would be incredible. So that's something that hopefully we'll see at a point.
That would be amazing. If there's like a pilot group or something that you need, I'll be part of that.
Well, and hopefully someone who hears this episode will be like, oh, I've got that app, so let's talk.
It's crazy how much stuff I can understand when I link it to my cycle and where I'm at, like hormonally. Because,
Yes.
for example, like I compete in this sport called powerlifting, which is like basically
That's
glorified
awesome.
way of lifting weights in front of people.
Yeah, it's so
But
awesome. My brother did powerlifting, I think, when he was, like, younger, so yeah,
oh no
go ahead.
way.
Yeah.
That's crazy when I meet people who like knew someone or did it themselves because I'm like, this is so niche that I don't expect that at all. But
Yeah.
so when I train 4 times a week, but there's weeks in the month where I feel really strong, and then there's weeks in the month where I feel like the weights are made of lead. And
Yeah.
I did a very like rudimentary style. I have a gym notebook and I just wrote down every day like where I'm at in my cycle and how I felt that day. And then I put it in a calendar, and I realized there's like 2 weeks in the month, like 2 weeks after my period, where I feel really weak. And
Yeah.
then the week of my period and also the week where I'm ovulating, I feel really, really strong. So that just makes
Yeah.
so much sense for me. And I can actually talk to my coach and then structure my programming around that so that on the, weeks where I feel strong, we do heavier lifts, and the weeks where I feel weaker, we like adjust accordingly. So everything, I feel like you can link so much stuff back to your cycle.
You can. Well, and also just in general, your physiology, and that's the thing that, again, there are apps already that exist that try to give tools to try to help people, but the reality is that there's so much that happens beneath the surface that we're not consciously aware of, I've been working out like 5 days a week, and I follow somebody on like YouTube, and I subscribe, give her some money as thanks so I don't have to go to the gym, but she's great because she has workout like weight routines as well as step and a variety of different things. And this year, I've worked really hard to bring in weight training because it's very important for women to engage in weight training, especially as you're getting older. So, what I've realized though is that when legs versus arms, I hate legs. I hate them so much. So I do them on Tuesdays because if I get to Thursday, there's a good chance that I'm going to half-ass it, or I'm going to find like the easiest one. Or so I've like taught myself over time, myself reflecting on like, okay, as the week goes on, I get tireder because of course, like work stacks up. And so if I really want to be successful, I need to be mindful and be self-aware of the days that I'm thriving versus not. So I love that.
That's so good. And you use the Six app to like figure that out, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. It's a combination of that and also recognizing again when I get up in the morning, like how many times have I really like gone the easy route if I do it late in the week. So
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. Laura, this has been great. I feel like this is a good point to ask you my
Yeah,
final question,
sure.
which is, what is your patriarchy hack?
It's hard to say just one. I've got a couple if that's okay. But
Totally.
I would say that the first thing that I find the most important is supporting women like authentically and entirely. So when I say that, there's so many different ways in which we can do that. And number one, it's shopping from women owned businesses. It's supporting women, female doctors, calling women who are doctors. I actually am very, very bad about this. When I used to teach, I would tell my students, like, don't call me doctor. I don't need it. But that's a tendency for women, which is to not own titles. So recognizing when women are in roles of leadership and calling that out and acknowledging it and supporting those and encouraging those female leaders, again, not only through our work but also through the world and the things that we do and the choices that we make. The way we spend our money goes so far we don't understand. And I'm over here in the States right now, we're very much going through this where it's like, spend your money mindfully because the way things are going, we need to like support with our wallets. And so again, very much that's something I find very important for helping to uplift women and really, break the patriarchy, right? I think it's also mentoring. Mentoring is so, so important. And Nikki, when you came, when you came to my colleague and like, I was so excited about joining, and this has been so great because 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe, I made a conscious decision that I wanted to do more to support women. And that is in mentoring and I helped to found a group called Women in Women for Economic Leadership and Development. I didn't found the group. I founded a California chapter with another colleague. I joined Women in Research and I started mentoring through there. There was something called Dress for Success, which was a female led organization focused on helping women who had previously been incarcerated or going through challenging times in life. So I think acting and making those decisions where you're intentionally putting your effort into, again, groups that are going to uplift women, but also in mentoring women so that they have somebody to say, you can, you are better than men, if not just as well, I'm lucky that when I was in like my first role out of grad school was with like on a team of 5 women. I don't even recognize how incredible and how lucky I have been to be able to work with incredible women leaders. But that's like seeing those things and seeking them out and seeking out mentors can really help to change that mindset, change the perspective, right? And I think also the second thing is really finding allies. So we want to obviously hack the patriarchy, but that doesn't mean that we have to do it as women alone. When I launched Women in Research in Tampa, where my husband and I lived previously, I opened it to, even though it was a women in research organization, it was all about bringing resources to and leveling the playing ground and bringing equality to, women working in this space. Men absolutely had a space there. And I would tell people, I reached out to people who were males working in this space in the community too. We need men to also be there and to stand up and to be allies and to speak out against inequalities and to speak for equal pay and to be leaders who act in ways that are empathic and caring. I'm very lucky that I get to work with under a CEO and a president who are incredible men who I call friends as well as coworkers, because they give a shit. They're out there also fighting this fight. And so finding allies and recognizing that the more people that you can get on the side, the better. I could probably go on and on, but I'll pause here. There's so many hacks that I'm like, yeah.
No, I love that. So it's uplifting other women and finding allies, especially men, which I think is so important, because if you just shun an entire group and it's the group who's benefiting from the system that we're trying to dismantle, then
right.
It just, I always say this, like, I'm not operating from a place of hatred for men. I'm operating out of a place of love for myself. So
yes. Yeah. And I will tell you, I'm so lucky. My husband is the first one who will say he's a feminist because he grew up in a family of women. It shouldn't require that though. The good news is, Nikki, there's, I heard a podcast, it's been years ago now, but we all have innate biases. We all have innate biases. Again, I'm very lucky that I was raised by a woman who showed me through her actions and by a father who vocally said, you're just as good as anyone else. I'm lucky. Not everyone is that lucky. And we all, again, come with these innate biases. And the good news is you can change those biases over time. How? By putting yourself around people who are different from you. So men who may not be feminists at this current point, they can be by aligning themselves with strong women who are not there to stomp on their head, who are there to walk next to them and not walk behind them and not start behind the starting line, So I think very much it's important that we bring and we make a space for those voices too, right? Where it's equal. I call myself a humanist because I care about humans. I want people to thrive. I don't understand how anyone doesn't thinks that some kind of characteristic makes someone less than. So I think that is just as equal because we all are fighting a fight for being treated fairly and equally, So
I love that. I love the term humanist. I mean, we should all be humanists, but
we should.
It requires empathy that a lot of people don't have. So
yeah,
I think that's amazing. I feel like this is the perfect place to end off. Laura, do you want to share with everyone where people can find you, where people can find the 6 app?
Yeah, absolutely. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. I love talking to people and love hearing about others' journeys. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Laura Beavin-Yates. And then you can find our 6 app available in the app stores. We're available on Apple and Android. And please give us a follow also on social. All our socials are the 6 app. So yeah, we look forward to talking to you.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for taking the time to be on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Nikki. This has been such an incredible conversation. And honestly, it's been a ton of fun. And I hope that, listeners get to take a couple things away from it. But thank you for inviting me.
There you have it, everyone. That was Dr. Laura Beavin-Yates. And I think this was an amazing conversation. I really hope you guys get something out of it. Check out the 6 app if that's something that interests you. I'm going to leave the links to the App Store in the show notes, and I'll leave the links to all their socials as well if you want to check out their pages. And in the meantime, don't forget that you are the baddest bitch in any building that you step foot in. All right, until next time, stay bad. Love you. Bye.